China's National Bureau of Statistics released data showing that the economic growth rate for the first half of 2025 was 5.3%, exceeding expectations. Exports reached approximately $1.81 trillion, growing by 7.2%, and the trade surplus hit $586 billion, both setting historical records. Given that export data for the second half of the year is expected to be stronger, China's annual trade surplus could reach $1.1 trillion or even $1.2 trillion, once again breaking human history's record. When Trump took office, many predicted his tough policies would cause China to collapse. I made a video at the time stating that Trump's election itself was a failure for the U.S. It meant the end of the four-year democratic strategy of uniting Western allies to suppress Russia. Russia would be freed from the passive situation in the Ukraine war, while Trump's preference for acting alone and disrespecting allies left the U.S. with no chance in a one-on-one confrontation with China. The tragedy for the U.S. lies in the fact that if Harris had been elected and continued uniting allies to weaken Russia, Putin would fully align with China, becoming its vassal, which would also pose a significant threat to the U.S. In short, the U.S. is in today's predicament due to overconfidence, underestimating China's strength, and partisan infighting. Regardless of the policy the U.S. adopts, it changes significantly every 4 to 8 years. Amid this partisan tug-of-war, China, initially battered, has recovered and begun to gather strength for a counterattack. China's current situation is not easy. To counter immense pressure from the U.S., the Chinese government has supported specific industries and large enterprises, consuming most of the funds, while small and medium-sized enterprises and self-employed individuals have been left to fend for themselves. Some local governments face deteriorating finances, struggling to sustain their economies, and central government support is unlikely to increase. To stimulate the economy, China has relaxed economic controls, with some cities exploiting policy loopholes to openly develop gray industries. China's current state is that government-supported industries are strong, with leading enterprises and state-owned companies highly competitive. However, small businesses, self-employed individuals, and ordinary workers face increasing economic pressure. The bursting of the real estate bubble has shrunk many people's wealth, reducing their ability to cope with economic crises. Fairly speaking, Chinese society's resilience to trade wars far surpasses that of the U.S., related to savings rates, consumption habits, and the abundance of goods. The economy is not as strong as before, but prices in China have not risen significantly and have even decreased. Chinese society has a vast array of affordable, decent quality goods, making it far less difficult for people to maintain their livelihoods than in the U.S. Judging by the packed restaurants and tourist attractions during holidays, the consumer market has taken a hit but retains strong underlying support. China's greatest advantage over the U.S. is that it has not only maintained its status as the world's factory, but also continues to increase its influence in global supply chains. Other major industrial countries like the U.S., Germany, Japan, and South Korea cannot match China's industrial scale. And as China's technology advances rapidly, these countries struggle to compete in efficiency. China's manufacturing now surpasses the combined output of the U.S. and the West. And crucially, its industry has grown under Western sanctions and containment, making it highly resilient and unafraid of pressure. China is building strength to strike back at Western countries using similar methods. Rare earth controls are just the beginning. In trade conflicts with the EU, China has extensively used tariffs and non-tariff measures, as the EU does, to precisely retaliate against EU countries. If the EU dares to side with the US, it will face enormous economic costs. Japan and South Korea, facing a giant like China, are powerless. In the past, they could recklessly join the US in sanctioning China. But now China's leverage is no smaller than the US's, and they are carefully weighing their interests. unlikely to actively support the US in the future. Take South Korea. A single rare earth sanction from China could bankrupt it. Not to mention that to punish South Korea for deploying the THAAD system, China has broadly targeted its strengths, nearly dismantling South Korea's technological lead in chip manufacturing, displays, and shipbuilding. If South Korea persists in aligning with the US to contain China, its collapse is imminent. South Korea's current political situation shows that pro-US presidents cannot last long, as the country cannot bear the cost of Chinese retaliation. Meanwhile, the US not only fails to protect its allies, but exploits them, launching ruthless trade wars, reaping profits from them, and insulting them with crude behavior. Trump openly called for annexing Canada, accused the EU of being formed to take advantage of the US in trade, and referred to Shigeru Ishiba as Mr. Japan, unable to even recall the Japanese Prime Minister's name. In my view, Trump and the US government long ago abandoned the idea of crushing China. Everything they do now is to maintain superficial harmony with China while focusing on exploiting allies and third-world countries. The Chinese government has not explicitly opposed the US and is easing tensions. China understands that confronting the US head-on is bold but risks being backstabbed by opportunistic countries like the EU, Japan, South Korea, and India. Thus, China remains silent on US hegemonic actions, letting the US plunder the world so that other countries can see its gangster nature. Otherwise, they might view China's resistance to the US as a fight between two gangsters, with the winner becoming the boss. Only by making these countries deeply understand the fundamental difference between Chinese and US foreign policies will China gain genuine support when it fully counters the US. Pakistan's use of Chinese weapons to defeat India showcased China's strength and steadfast support for allies. Israel's strikes on Iran and India's shameless betrayal of Iran revealed the hostility of the West and India toward Muslims to Middle Eastern countries. The US attacking its allies has made the Western world realize that the threat to their interests is not China, thousands of miles away, but the US, their most trusted partner. Russia, under US and Western containment, has abandoned illusions and aligned with China. As more third-world countries gradually recognize the US's gangster nature, its hegemony is not far from collapse. China now has two choices: sacrifice some minor interests and dignity to maintain the US's status as the global leader, joining it in exploiting other countries, or stand up, fiercely counter the US, and seek justice for other nations. China has immense strength, and its only fear is other countries standing by idly. Thus, China must wait patiently and not rush, letting the US make the first move.